I've read that the Gospel according to Mark is a passion narrative with a long introduction. And so our reading today from about blind Bartimaeus is right in the middle of those two. Jesus has been preaching in Galilee, and he, you have to admit, had limited success trying to teach about the kingdom of God. The parable of the sower seems to indicate the way things were going. Some of the seed fell on rocky ground. Some of it fell on shallow ground. It was going difficult, especially with the reading from last Sunday, which is so similar to the one today. It has some similarities, and I want to talk a little bit about those. You remember last Sunday was when James and John came to Jesus. And they said a question, if you're a parent, that you have heard over and over again. And it goes something like this. Will you do something for me, but I can't tell you what it is? You've gotten some of those kind of questions. I want you to do something for me. Will you do it? In other words, you don't have all the information. And so it's pretty hard to say that you're going to do something when you don't know what it is. And it was the same kind of a question that they gave Jesus. And Jesus then asked that question, that very important question that he's asking blind Bartimaeus and that he's asking you and me as well. And that question that we all are going to have to answer is, what would you have me do for you? What do you want Jesus to do for you this day? Now, that's a hard question. Now, especially to give a good answer. Don't say that you want to sit on his right hand or his left hand. Don't say that you want to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, because, you know, he tries to talk about the kingdom of heaven, and he's saying things like, those who will be first will be last, and the last shall be first. And the disciples still didn't get it. And then he says, whoever wishes to be first among you must be the slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. In other words, what would you have me do for you? And so here comes blind Bartimaeus, and it's right smack dab in the middle of the Gospel of Mark. He's finished his work in Galilee. He's on the way to Jerusalem. And then right there in Jericho is blind Bartimaeus. And the very next thing in the Gospel is the entry into Jerusalem. So it's at a critical passage here. And they're in Jericho, and there's a large crowd. And then there's blind Bartimaeus sitting on the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus, he began to shout, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Wouldn't you know it? The person who should not have known who Jesus is does. And all those people, the religious people who should have known who Jesus was, didn't. Son of David, have mercy on me. And many sternly ordered him to be quiet, and he cried even more loudly, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stood still, stopped the whole crowd, and said, call him here. And they called the blind man, said to him, take heart, get up, he's calling you. And then, throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Now, Sam Wells talks about the importance of that cloak. Throwing off his cloak, he sprang up. And then Jesus asked him the question, what would you like for me to do for you? And the blind man said to him, my teacher, let me see again. And Jesus said, go, your faith has made you well. And immediately he regained his sight, and immediately he followed him on the way. Now, this cloak that blind Bartimaeus threw off when Jesus said, "Come to him," was a very important fixture for a blind beggar. Because you see, that's where people put the money. And so if he got rid of his cloak, he was going to have to get rid of his whole profession as a blind beggar, because he had the faith to know that Jesus was going to change his life. That cloak protected him from dust, protected him from rain, protected him from all the things that being on the ground in a dusty place could be. And so my question for us this morning is, what cloak are we hanging on to? When Jesus passes by and says, "What do you want me to do for you?" Do you have a cloak that you don't want to turn loose of enough to spring up and throw it away so that you can go and follow him just like Jesus, just like blind Bartimaeus did? One of the cloaks that we have trouble with sometimes is the cloak of wealth and possessions. Now, there's nothing wrong with money. We're going to talk about money some today too. It's our Pledge Sunday, as you know. There's nothing wrong with having money as long as it's not in the center of your life. That place is reserved for God. And if your possessions don't allow you enough time to worship God on Sunday, there's a problem here, because your possessions are in the center of your life instead of God. Some of us have trouble with a cloak of education. Now, all these are good things, but they can turn into bad things if they're overemphasized. If education is at the center of your life and Jesus says, "What would you have me do for you?" you might say, "Well, Lord, I'd really like a bigger library." If money is at the center of your life, you might say, "Oh, I just need a raise." Or, "Lord, if you could just help me with that new car." Some of us have a cloak of religion. Can you believe that? Religion being a problem. But if religion if you are the only one that knows all about religion, that could be a problem. And if all those other people don't have a clue, that could be a problem. Because righteousness sometimes can be a problem. Sometimes we are too blind to know that we can't see. That's the way it was with the scribes and Pharisees. Another cloak that sometimes gets us is the cloak of social righteousness. The cloak of being politically correct all the time, regardless. Striving to say the right thing all the time. To never do certain things and to always do certain things, so much that your whole life is built around that. That's a cloak that could get in the way when Jesus walks by in your life. And finally, another cloak is the religion of life religion as a life assurance contract. Jesus wants to be in the center of your life. It's not like taking a vow, paying your money, and then going your merry way. That's not what religion is about. And if it is, that's a problem, because something besides Jesus is in the middle of your life, if that's the way it is. Having cloaks is normal, because life is uncertain. But just like the rich young ruler couldn't part with his money, and James and John wanted their status, sometimes cloaks can keep us from jumping up, throwing them aside, and following Jesus on the way. And the reason that we have to shed those cloaks is because Jesus is asking each of us a question: what is it that you would like for me to do for you? And if we have cloaks in the middle of our life, those cloaks are going to influence what we say. They won't let us step out into the unknown like blind Bartimaeus did. He was going to have to change his whole profession. If you're hanging on to that financial cloak, I invite you at least to loosen your grasp a bit. Today being Pledge Sunday, I want to give you a little testimony that if you will raise your pledge and have a little bit of faith that God will make up the difference, let me tell you, He will. He will. And then next year, you won't even miss it. You raise it a little bit more, and you trust God to make up the difference, and He will. This is a life of faith. Now, I'm not saying you need to go crazy, but I'm just saying raise your pledge a little bit and see what happens. See what happens. And then next year, don't just say, put me down for the same. Raise it some more and trust in the Lord, and He will make up the difference. I'm telling you, that's the way it works. That's the way it works. In morning prayer this week, we're reading from the book of Ecclesiasticus. And on Monday, we read from chapter 4, which has a verse that says, "Do not let your hand be stretched out to receive, and closed when it is time to give." That just convicts me. Do not let your hand be reached out to receive and closed when it is time to give. We've been asking you for the last 4 weeks to think about how God has blessed you. And so in your pledge, I hope that you will step forward in faith. Get rid of that cloak. If there's a cloak that is in the middle of your life instead of Jesus, throw it aside, just like blind Bartimaeus did. If you feel the Lord tugging at your heart, I invite you to follow the words of a missionary to India who wrote, "I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning."